Let's turn our attention now to the president-elect and his transition team. The Biden transition team calling the Trump administration deeply irresponsible after Treasury Secretary Mnuchin failed to renew several Fed emergency lending programs. Brian Cheung has been all over this story for us. And Brian, walk us through what exactly the argument is here, because we did hear from Secretary Mnuchin earlier this week saying this is all a misunderstanding. These programs were not widely used. And yet you've got the Biden transition team saying, look, you are making our job even more difficult when we come into office in January.
Well, Akiko, a bit of a breakup between the Fed and the Treasury, if you will. They've worked together very well over the last 8 months during this crisis to help prevent an economic collapse amid this COVID-19 pandemic. But it seems like Mnuchin at the Treasury and Jay Powell at the Fed have kind of come at a crossroads as of last week, when they were disagreeing over whether or not they should let their Federal Reserve liquidity facilities expire as they were set to expire on December 31st. The Treasury arguing that 9 of those 13 facilities should be closed as of that date, whereas the Federal Reserve arguing that that support to markets like corporate debt or municipal bonds should be extended past that point in time. Now, the resolution so far and where we stand is that the Fed has agreed to the Treasury's request, saying that they will ultimately close them down despite their disagreement over doing so, and that they will remit the money. And the latest development that we got from a Bloomberg report yesterday is that the $429 billion that the Treasury requested as a refund from unused CARES Act money will be put into the Treasury General Account. Now, the TGA, for those that are kind of in the weeds here, is a pretty remarkable development, because the Treasury had the option to take that money and put it in what they call the Exchange Stabilization Fund. If they put it in the ESF, it would have allowed the Treasury and the Fed to reopen those facilities once the next Treasury Secretary is put in place and decided, let's say, for example, if it's Janet Yellen as reported, that she could help work with Jay Powell to reopen those facilities using that money. But Mnuchin's decision to put it into a different pot of money, again, the TGA, means that it won't be accessible for the next Treasury Secretary to use if they felt that there was an emergency need to do so. This has really triggered a big legal argument, as many Fed watchers have pointed out, over whether or not they can actually use that money in the future and whether or not the Treasury had the authority to put it in that place. So very interesting developments happening there.
Well, and also there's this thinking that the next Treasury Secretary, if in fact it is Janet Yellen, would need congressional approval, right, to tap into the roughly $450 billion you're talking about. What are the chances of that approval actually going forward?
Yeah, well, again, this is all part of that legal ambiguity there. There's a question about whether or not the money that's been re-put back in the TGA could be redeployed as easily as when the Treasury Secretary comes back, or rather when there's a new Treasury Secretary after inauguration next year. Now, what we do know is that the CARES Act had some provisions explaining and laying out where the money could go if it was unused, and then what would need to be done for it to be reallocated. So some interpretations of it would say that because the Treasury has put it in the TGA as opposed to the Exchange Stabilization Fund, the next Treasury Secretary could not immediately redeploy that money unless Congress were to pass a new bill that would specifically outline exactly what they wanted that money to go towards. So even if, let's say, for example, Janet Yellen, if she does get confirmed as Treasury Secretary, would say, I want to reuse this money, she would still have to consult some lawyers within the Treasury and on Capitol Hill to determine if that is going to be the case. Either or, this process largely slows down the ability of the Treasury and the Fed, if they wanted to reopen these facilities. And again, keep in mind, there will be that lapse because they expire December 31st. Inauguration would be January 20th. The Treasury Secretary would have to get confirmed at some point in time. So markets essentially are buckling in for the concept of not having those liquidity backstops, at least for the beginning part of next year.
Yeah, one of the many complicated threads, I guess we can characterize it as that, in this transition process.